Hey everyone, this is Haelian. We're back again with another guide, and today is going to be all about the Pact of Punishment and Heat. First, we're going to cover the Pact of Punishment as a system in total in Hades, and then we're going to go over what pacts I think are easiest to start off with when you're trying to increase your heat, and also what pacts I think you should avoid. After that, we're going to go over what pacts I think you should use when trying to achieve 8, 16, and 32 heat, respectively. And these heat numbers are important because Skelly's going to give you an amazing prize for completing each of them. I'll also be providing tips on a few good builds that I think work really well at these highest levels of heat, and that will hopefully be easiest to achieve the win with. As always, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe for your dear old damp dad. It really helps me out, guys. And before we get started, I had to let you know about the amazing content you're missing out on right now at twitch.tv/Haelian.
I'm joking. How do you do this?
Wow, what a guy. Alright guys, let's get started. So the Pact of Punishment is a scaling difficulty system within Hades where you can choose from many different options on how to make your runs more difficult. The reason why you want to use it is because there are bounties in the game that give you extensive rewards for beating bosses at higher and higher heat. These rewards can be Titan's Blood, which can be used to unlock or level up weapon aspects, diamonds to make purchases from the house contractor, or ambrosia, which are used to advance storylines with characters in the game. When you open the Pact of Punishment, it will list what bounties you have or have not collected for your current weapon. Increasing the heat beyond your lowest clear will not net you extra bounties, and you will simply receive the lowest bounties you have not gotten yet. The Pact of Punishment is an amazing system that encourages players to experiment with different difficulty modifiers, and I definitely think you should spend time to try things out yourself, even if it's not something that I recommend. Most of the time, the difficulty comes from nasty combinations of several packs instead of singular ones. There are so many different ways to play Hades, and it can definitely come down to player preference for what will work best sometimes. To start, let me assure you that any weapon and any aspect will work at lower heat levels, and arguably even at higher heat levels. I recommend just starting with your favorite weapon and aspect when first increasing the heat levels to get an idea of what it feels like. If you still need some direction after that, I can always recommend a shield aspect so you can block enemy attacks, or maybe a bow aspect just for the long range. When you're first deciding where to apply heat in the Pact of Punishment, it may seem a bit overwhelming because there are so many options. Luckily, the first few levels are super easy to fill in, and I bet you'll find yourself often forgetting you even have it on. If you put 1 point into hard labor or lasting consequences, you probably won't even feel much of a difference. Tight deadline is another great option, since if you plan to go far into the heat numbers, it's good to get used to working with a timer. Some things we should mention about tight deadline are that it is paused at certain points when playing, choosing boons or well items, fighting Thanatos, leaving a boss room and traversing to the next zone, and when you are in story rooms from Sisyphus, Eurydice, or Patroclus. Whatever time you have left at the end of a zone will be added to the time for the next. You definitely want to keep an eye on the timer in the bottom left and make sure you're not taking any more Styx paths than you can handle though. Almost anything works in the first couple of heats, so don't feel like you have to take my recommendations here. However, I would say that there are a few nasty packs that you should definitely avoid when first experimenting. Approval process crosses out one of your boon choices for 2 heat and will cross out 2 choices for an additional 3 heat. This is probably the toughest pact on the whole list since it greatly limits your ability to control your build, and you'll find yourself with a surplus of useless upgrades a lot of the time. Routine inspection will disable the bottom 3 mirror upgrades for each 2 heat that you put into it. Even the first level of routine inspection is devastating if you've unlocked the bottom of the mirror already, since losing Fated, Persuasion, or Authority, God's Pride or Legacy, and Dark Foresight is a real kick to your ability to gain powerful boons. After that, the only other pact I don't recommend right away is Calisthenics Program, which will increase the health of all enemies by 15% per point of heat. The reason is that oftentimes the barrier you need to break is getting past bosses, and increasing the amount of time it takes to kill them by 15% just gives them more opportunity to damage you. For a measly 1 heat, it just doesn't seem worth it. I would avoid all 3 of these packs all the way up to 32 heat. After your first 1 or 2 heat selections, another great option is Underworld Customs for 2 more additional heat. This pact requires you to sell a boon in between each zone at the Purging Well, meaning you really need to plan around it while making your door choices. I consider this an easier pact because fairly often we're all forced to take boons we don't really need. Keep in mind that certain boons cannot be sold because they have immediate effects. These include Sunken Treasure from Poseidon, Premium Vintage from Dionysus, Nourished Soul from Demeter, and Rare Crop from Demeter. I really like this pact because it tests your decision-making ability and makes you think harder about what doors and boons to take, thus making the entire game more interesting in my opinion when you're using this pact. Another easier pact is Middle Management. For 2 heat, you'll get more difficult mini-bosses in each zone. This can be a bit of a jump when you first turn it on since you may need to learn some additional attack patterns. The hardest change might be to the Mega Gorgon and Super Skull Crusher fight in Asphodel, where the Gorgon teleports randomly and the Skull Crusher sends a shockwave that you have to dash over. Still, for 2 heat, I consider it a steal since most of the alternate mini-bosses are not that much more threatening than the originals. The lower the heat, the more options you're going to have. There are near countless ways to complete a heat, but if I were to recommend a specific pack setup, it would look something like Underworld Customs, Middle Management, Tight Deadline Level 1, Extreme Measures Level 1, Jury Summons Level 1, and Lasting Consequences Level 1. Extreme Measures can make the Fury Sister fight much more challenging, but it's probably for the best that you start getting used to the enhanced fight now since you will often be forced to take multiple levels of this pact as you climb higher and higher in heat. You will still only have to defeat one sister, but the others will appear to throw more projectiles and other hazards your way during the fight. Jury Summons only affects regular enemy encounters and will not make mini-boss or boss fights more difficult. For similar reasons, I think that Lasting Consequences is slightly easier to deal with since hard labor would make the boss fights more difficult, which would often be the hurdle we're trying to get over. Some honorable mentions that you could use here instead are Benefits Package Level 1, Forced Overtime Level 1, Convenience Fee, or Damage Control. Damage Control can make some runs with certain weapons and aspects more difficult if they are slow hitting, such as Arthur, so I can't always recommend taking it. Some easy combos to take care of damage control are having Zeus, Dionysus, or Ares as your primary source of damage, since they have on-hit effects that will help strip the blue hearts off of enemies. This is where things start to get really interesting. Of course, we're going to take the same packs from the first 8 heat and expand from there. Now is a good time to mention that when using Tight Deadline, you really need to balance it around other packs that can increase the time it takes to clear rooms, namely Jury Summons, Calisthenics Program, Benefits Package, and Damage Control. There are some other packs that can make things take longer, but they are not as direct as these. Increasing these packs while also reducing the time you have from Tight Deadline can create a very dangerous situation. When the timer hits 0, you will take 5 damage every second until the boss of the zone you are in is dead, even if you're not in the boss's chamber. I think we want to add these packs to our setup to start, and we can mention some alternates. Convenience Fee Level 1, Extreme Measures Level 2, Forced Overtime Level 1, Benefits Package Level 1. I consider this a pretty reasonable setup for 16 heat. The biggest hurdle is going to be getting used to Forced Overtime, I think. Enemies will move faster and attack more quickly, meaning bosses will have shorter delays between their attacks and thus less opportunity for you to damage them as well. Forced Overtime is worth 3 heat for each level, so it's difficult to say no to. However, you could try swapping it out for Tight Deadline Level 2 and maybe Convenience Fee Level 2 to make up the 3 heat if you'd like. It's worth mentioning that Convenience Fee increases the cost of shop and well items, meaning buying back health and death defiances is much more difficult. If you're going for a build that can handle damage control easily, you could swap that in also to reduce Benefits Package or Forced Overtime potentially. Benefits Package isn't very threatening at level 1, but can suddenly become problematic at level 2 if you get some nasty combos. Then you add Forced Overtime and suddenly a seemingly simple encounter becomes a nightmare at moments. Our options are starting to dwindle now, and we have to venture into some very scary territory. Some of our pack selections are now going to depend on what weapon and aspect we're using. Melee builds such as Fist and Sword are going to become very difficult at this heat, but definitely not impossible. Let's add some unavoidable packs first and then go over what options we have left. Convenience Fee level 2, Jury Summons level 2, Extreme Measures 3, Benefits Package level 2, and Tight Deadline level 2. These, plus the packs we already had, will net us 26 heat. Not far off from our goal, but these last 6 points are going to be the toughest. First off, the deadline you're facing is not necessarily going to be easy with 40% more enemies from Jury Summons. Make sure you never skip middle shops or story rooms, and definitely consider Chaos Gates as a good way to save time by not having to face enemy encounters. You'll probably want to get into the practice of pausing at doors when you need to think about which to take, since the timer will also pause then. If you find yourself struggling against the timer still, you can reduce Jury Summons and put some points into Damage Control, Hard Labor, or Lasting Consequences instead. Extreme Measures level 3 means that the hero's boss fight will be quite a bit more difficult, and if you get the Minotaur mini-boss in Elysium, that fight is substantially more difficult as well. I don't necessarily think that Theseus is more difficult when riding his chariot, but the Minotaur is definitely more menacing in the gold-plated armor. You're probably wondering why we haven't taken heightened security yet, and the answer is that 400% more damage from traps is just really punishing. A simple 5 damage spike trap now deals 25, and the urns in the final boss fight go from dealing 30 to 150 damage. I don't think it's worth taking unless you're wanting to increase your trap skills, honestly. At this 26 heat total, what we choose to fill the rest with can really depend on what build you're going for. If you're going to use a fast-hitting weapon or aspect such as the rail with Zeus's Chain Lightning, then go ahead and take the easy double damage control and last Jury Summons. You could then consider taking Forced Overtime level 2 to fill the last gap in, but 40% faster enemies and bosses can be very scary. I might recommend taking 60% Hard Labor instead, since I think that increasing the frequency of enemy attacks is more threatening than harder hitting enemies. If you want to take the second level of Forced Overtime, I would avoid putting too much into Hard Labor, since that can be a very nasty combo. If you want to go for a slower hitting build such as Arthur Aspect, you cannot afford to take Damage Control. You're going to need to put in a lot more Hard Labor points. Hard Labor level 5 and another Lasting Consequences could work in this particular instance, since Arthur gives you extra health to start and the special aura reduces the damage you take by 40%. I don't recommend taking Forced Overtime level 2 with Arthur because the combo attacks come out so slowly and enemies will often interrupt you if they are too fast. If you wanted to take Guan Yu and utilize the spin tech, you could take Lasting Consequences level 4 since the heal from the spin still comes through. I recommend avoiding Hard Labor with Guan Yu though, since your health total is going to be much lower than usual, so maybe double damage control is fine when going for the spin tech. Another note about taking Lasting Consequences level 4 is that you do get some healing from certain things still. Guan Yu's spin is one example, quick recovery from Hermes also gets you some health back, but otherwise almost nothing else can actually heal you then. At 32 heat, it's not crazy to take the first point of approval process for the 2 heat. With Fated Persuasion, you'll still be able to forge a build relatively easily. You may just find yourself getting frustrated because it's going to feel like you have a lot less control over your run and you're leaving the outcome more up to chance than skill possibly. I would really not recommend taking Extreme Measures level 4 at 32 heat since the fight is substantially longer and more difficult. Hades moves and attacks faster, has a wider array of abilities, and has almost 50% more health. Even if you walk in with 3 Death Defiances, there's no guarantee you're walking out. If you wanted to complete it anyway, I recommend avoiding as much Hard Labor as possible and the second level of Forced Overtime, since those will make the final fight substantially more difficult. If you're confident in the speed of your build and your ability to tackle a tighter deadline, you can try Tight Deadline level 3. Like I said earlier, you must be very careful how you balance other packs, especially when you only have 5 minutes for each biome. I'd recommend removing both Jury Summons if you do this, and possibly avoid damage control unless you're using some very quick hitting builds. Even with careful planning from the Pact of Punishment, sometimes luck doesn't go your way and you may find yourself losing time every biome from a lack of free rooms and a build that didn't achieve what you had hoped. One of the benefits of taking the more difficult deadline here though is that by removing the extra enemies from Jury Summons, you'll consequently take less damage on average in enemy encounters since they will go by faster. Also, some weapons and aspects such as Chiron for the bow have a hard time dealing with multiple enemies at once and strive at dealing a lot of single target damage instead, meaning that additional enemies in each chamber are considerably more dangerous for it. I heavily prefer taking Tight Deadline level 3 over taking packs like Jury Summons personally, but it definitely takes some practice to get used to that 5-minute deadline. I'm going to mention just a few nice builds that I consider to be easier to use to complete 32 heat with now. The same rules and strategies will apply if you're still trying to clear lower amounts of heat. Some regular boons that will help every run are Divine Dash from Athena to help deflect attacks and projectiles, Greatest Reflex from Hermes to get better movement, and Hyper Sprint from Hermes for similar reasons. I really can't stress enough how important Greatest Reflex is. When you dash in Hades, you have a very brief moment of invincibility and can outright dodge entire attacks despite being in the animation. Adding more dashes will make this easier and will also allow you to get away from enemies more easily when needed. Now, I won't be mentioning too much about the mirror perks to take here, so I recommend checking out my mirror guide on YouTube if you have questions about that. Also, I heavily recommend taking Eurydice's Evergreen Acorn Keepsake or Skelly's Lucky Tooth for Elysium and Styx for your runs for better survivability. The more hard labor you have on, the better the Acorn will be since it blocks hits no matter how much damage they deal. The first build I would recommend trying is with Chaos Shield. Being able to block in Hades is a huge advantage, so it's only natural that this makes the list. No matter what, I would take double damage control, and simply adding more hard labor shouldn't feel too punishing after getting used to blocking at the right times. We really want to take advantage of our charged up special move after bull rushing, so I recommend putting either Zeus, Ares, or Dionysus on the special for the on-hit effects. If you take Zeus, you really want to see as many more Zeus boons as possible, since getting jolted or double strike will increase your damage substantially. With Dionysus, going for Ares' attack boon and then the duo boon Curse of Nausea is a great damage increase. If using Ares' special, I might recommend going for Merciful End, but it's actually quite difficult to get. Simply palming your Doom damage and maybe grabbing Impending Doom or Dire Misfortune will definitely help this. The best hammers here I think are Explosive Return for a little bit of extra AoE damage, Charged Shot for a piercing Bull Rush move, or Sudden Rush just for better maneuverability. When I revisited this build for this video, the damage felt very underwhelming until I was able to get Privileged Status going reliably on enemies. After that, I was able to build up damage by gathering some dual boons to help my Hangover do even better, and then by the end I felt actually very powerful and very safe with this build. The next build I want to mention involves Aspect of Hestia. Hestia's Empowered Shot has a super long range, meaning you can stay much further away from enemies and thus staying more safe. Since we have to reload between each shot to get the added effect, damage control would make this build substantially more difficult, so I would definitely avoid it. Since we'll be playing at a far range from enemies most of the time, you can take more hard labor and it won't feel too punishing, I think. Aspect of Hestia is actually a great choice for clearing 32 heat, as long as you get used to reloading yourself after every shot. I definitely recommend rebinding the default reload button if you're using a controller on the PC version. I use the left trigger myself with an Xbox One controller. If you're going to go for this build, you should take a percentage-based boon for your attack from Artemis, Athena, Aphrodite, or Demeter to increase your empowered shot damage even more. Some great hammers for this would be Ricochet or Piercing Fire to hit multiple enemies, and even something like Cluster or Rocket Bomb to throw out occasionally while reloading. This build was the one I had the easiest time with when recording the footage for this video. The long range and high damage on the empowered shot just makes bosses feel much less threatening, and they went by very quickly. Grabbing something like Splash Dash from Poseidon might not be a bad idea, since dealing with groups of small enemies can be annoying with this build. Another great long distance build would be the Aspect of Chiron. With this, you can easily take double damage control since your attack will strip one heart, and the first arrow from the special will negate the second. Chiron has a lot of possibilities in terms of boon options. Dionysus can work great on the special, and you can go for one of the two duo boons to up that hangover damage, Curse of Nausea from Ares or Low Tolerance from Aphrodite. Artemis still works great on the special too, and you could go for Aphrodite's attack to apply weak on enemies and then try to get the Heartrend duo boon from them to do a lot more damage. The two best hammers with Chiron are definitely Concentrated and Relentless Volley, which increase your special damage significantly. Some backups might be Piercing Volley to pierce shielded enemies, Flurry Shot, or a Triple Shot just as a little bit of extra on your attack. You have to be careful with Chiron though, because the special move on the bow has a rather long animation and can lock you in place for a long time. I wouldn't recommend this with forced overtime at 40% at all, and you might have a hard time in tight spaces like sticks, where it's not easy to use the special well. You might want to rely on other avenues of damage more in these small chambers. I know that these aspects that I mentioned are somewhat costly with Titan's Blood, so I have a couple of runner-up builds if you're short. Zagreus aspect with the rail and Zeus's attack will strip damage control easily, and as long as you get some follow-up Zeus spoons, it should deal with enemies rather quickly as well. Zagreus aspect with the fists and Athena's attack will also help get rid of damage control easily, on top of dealing enough damage to deal with some jury summons. I definitely recommend attempting to grab Athena's dash with this build too, since melee builds are quite dangerous. Also avoid taking too much hard labor here, just because you're going to be in danger a lot of the time. In closing, I want you to keep in mind that you're not going to beat 32 heat on your first try, pretty much no matter what. It took me many attempts myself, so don't get disheartened if it doesn't all come together right away. Practice has a lot of value here. Find a build that you like and that you're confident with, and try to stick with it till you get that victory finally. Alright guys, that does it for our heat guide for today, and I'd love to know what you think about it, so please leave comments below and tell me about your experience with increasing the heat levels, what packs you like, what packs you don't like, and let me know about what you thought about the video too. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys later. Bye bye now.